Hello and welcome to an episode of Hawk Talk. I'm joined with capitalist Neocon, and he asked if he could come on this show to respond to a debate he did with on Superpower Broadcasting earlier. So is there anything you just want to start with? Do you want to
Yeah.
start with an introduction?
Oh yeah. Thanks for inviting me on the show. To get post thoughts on the debate, since I think it's good to get thoughts, not just my impression of how the debate went, but also from another hawk what they thought of the debate. Since I didn't rewatch the debate, but I did check a bit after, and I did see there was the channel Hot Take or Hot Talks, which posted a few comments trying to clarify that Kevin's view of Germany would just keep expanding and expanding indefinitely wasn't really the case then. So, in general, I just wanted to see what our thoughts and impressions were about how the debate went.
Well, if do you want to start with your thoughts, or you want me to start with my thoughts, or how do you want to do this?
Okay, I can start with my thoughts then, since as far as both of our arguments, I said a bit earlier in my introduction that with Kevin's argument of just Germany would keep expanding indefinitely, and before 2000 they would take over the world and nuke America, I don't think that would really be the case, just because, I mean, in terms of the war, each country was borrowing money, so it's not like Germany could just keep borrowing and get 500% of their economy in debt in order to take over Africa and Asia. So at least for me, that was one main part that I thought was Kevin was a bit misguided on, of just thinking Germany would keep expanding.
Yeah. Well, with my thing with the World War II is that I honestly don't think anyone can really, because the issue with Kevin did a terrible job going after your points, but I also don't particularly think that the points about saying the economic side was was helping, because generally speaking, World War II wasn't really a war of offense; it was a war of defense. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I get that argument then. Because with World War II, more so there was Pearl Harbor, which resulted in more deaths than the Lusitania attack. But what did you at least one impression or so of how you thought Kevin did in the debate?
I
How I
think he
did?
did. Well, I don't think that Kevin did particularly well in that debate on either three topics, because World War One, that was all speculation. World War Two, it was again speculation that wasn't true. And then divorce was when you won, because Kevin's point about multiple partners and premarital sex leads to less divorce was just plain wrong.
Yeah, since on that part, then I mean, as far as what I was trying to get Kevin to answer, where if you don't have any state involvement, then how can hundreds of millions of people regulate themselves then? And there wasn't really an answer, or Kevin, he would say, in fact, actually, divorce is a good thing then, and compared it to the economy with job turnout. And
Yes. I mean, I don't know if you saw the post show, but that was if I were you, I wouldn't, just because he was generally insulting towards you and towards other people in the chat. But
yeah, for the Pulso, I saw part of it, but I mean, in terms of criticism, I mean, I think in terms of his arguments on on divorce, like there wasn't really an answer. And as far as World War One and World War Two, I mean, this idea that like Germany would just expand or like nuke America before 2000 is largely speculation then.
Like I've said, and I said this in the chat of this show, that I don't think Germany would have taken over the world because Italy and Japan would have countered Germany, because they would have had differing interests.
Yeah, that's true. And the other thing, I mean, even the like British Empire, it couldn't take over the world then. And it's like very hard for a regional power to exert world influence for, I mean, decades, if not hundreds of years.
I would say, though, on like the World War II point, I would say, at least even for optics reason, it is not advisable to say that we should have aligned with Nazi Germany. Like, that's a criticism of you I have.
Yeah, that is true. That I think for World War One, there's more of a case just because with the German Empire, like it doesn't have as bad of a reputation, but I do get the argument for World War Two because like it looks really bad then. And in terms of like history classes, like that's mainly what they focus on with atrocities. They focus on the atrocities committed in Germany and don't cover too much the atrocities committed in the Soviet Union then. But I do see like the optics argument then, and for that, like my case to Kevin was just a lesser of two evils argument, and I wanted to like get into a bit of ideology with him, but like he was hung up on if you didn't go against the Germans, they would have nuked America because they had scientists. Yeah, I think in ideological debate, like between which ideology is worse, that kind of would have answered like the question easier, made the debate more productive then.
If I'm being silent, it's just something's wrong with my computer right now, so maybe you can continue on.
Yeah, okay, I'll continue on with it since basically like Kevin's point during the debate is that Nazism and communism are just fascism and communism, two sides of the same coin. In which for that, I mean, even among like different types of fascism and communism, I mean, fascism wasn't as bad as Nazism in the sense the death toll under like Pinochet's Chile versus Hitler's Germany was far less then. So, I mean, even among those two, they're very different, meaning that when you compare them to communism, you can't just say all three are two or fascism is the same as communism or Nazism is the same as communism as well. Or even if they're different, the fact that they're two sides of the same coin, like if a person can distinguish among different types of communism or fascism, then you can't just say the two as a whole are the same thing. Then. Yeah, and then I would say the other point on like Kevin's part is he was trying to say that if Germany took over land instead of the Soviet Union, is that it would have resulted in more deaths. And which for that, like there is definitely a debate, but I would say probably not, just because like with the Soviet Union's economy, is more of those deaths were due to starvation in the sense citizens couldn't get food, while in Germany it was really like late into the war and after where there were food shortages and high inflation then, meaning that their economy was better. And even Kevin conceded the point that they could see that they could feed their citizens better on average. So I don't really see the argument of how the death toll would have been greater than 100 million.
Yeah, the thing is, he he tried to attack that point from a moralist perspective when it's a realistic perspective, and so I don't particularly think that strategy works too well.
Like as far as the moral argument sense, I could see how with Kevin's line of reasoning, if he does view them as two sides of the same coin, I mean, you try to side with the smaller power and put them against the bigger power. Yeah, and for him, he was like viewing it from that security angle as well, where he wasn't really hung up on morals, since morally he views them the same then.
Yeah, like I definitely think that it wouldn't. I would say that the Soviet Union was worse than Nazi Germany. At least the thing with Nazi Germany is, I do think though, while the Soviet Union was worse, I would argue Nazi Germany was more morally bad because the Soviet Union, it was bad because it killed people. Oh, some of them on a lot of those people who died were on accidents. A lot of them were on purpose or too. But in Nazi Germany, almost everyone who died under that regime died on purpose.
Yeah, because I would say for World War II, like there is more of a debate there, but what would you say about like the German Empire and like Bolshevik Russia then? Because with the German Empire, it wasn't as bad as Nazi Germany for obvious reasons.
Oh no, not even close. It's like it is true that there was some what there were definitely some troubling factors with the German Empire. It is known that Wilhelm II held a lot of anti-American, anti-Semitic views, but also what's important to realize is that Wilhelm II couldn't just call all the shots. There was a parliament, and there were his advisors who often try to sideline him.
Yeah, because even Parliament at the time, it's not like all wanted to just had the expansionist view of keep expanding indefinitely. And even during the World War II, World War One conflict, a lot of it was trench warfare where it was hard to gain ground in Europe. I mean, let alone the world. And even before America intervened, it was largely stale until America could tip the Allied powers over the edge.
Yeah. I feel like what should have happened is there should have been more of a effort to essentially push a peace deal on both of them. What you would consider a status quo antebellum peace deal. Once the Russians felt the revolution, that's probably what should have been pushed.
Yeah, since I think for that, like given all the borrowing that occurred on the part of the UK and the US, where Kevin seemed to say like, well, they should have just borrowed more money then, is it would have been better like at least in the short run. That doesn't mean in the long run all sides will hold up the peace agreement, but at least in the short run too, like to not escalate further, there could have definitely been a peace deal with World War One.
Well,
Yeah.
I suppose if like another thing, if you, I mean, we have a person here who thinks you want to side with Nazis. I think as a way to like make it not seem so bad, you should say we should never have lend-leased the Soviet Union because honestly, I think that would have been better policy because Soviet Union would have done it without lend-lease. But the thing is, they would have done it slow and less effective, and so likely more land would have been liberated by the Allies and not the Soviets.
Yeah, since that's true for like World War II, there is the optics argument then, like of it. But with World War I, like is you did say for that, like there could have been a peace deal, and like the Russians at the time, like there should have been some containment policy then.
Yeah, it's like again, I don't think it would be morally. I don't think it would be morally bad to side with the German Empire if they accepted a peace treaty, because we worked with all those people against communism. We voted with Sharato. We worked with DM. We worked with I can't think of his name. Sigmund Rhee against the communists. So honestly, working with Nazi Germany would not have been this terrible stain we did. It would have just been another alliance.
Yeah, since even the US, I mean, it's worked with Pinochet, in which I'm not sure if like, you can clarify if Kevin has ever supported the US working with Pinochet to take out Allende from power.
He has though, but recently he's been getting weaker on like those positions, especially with like Shirato in recent days. He's been calling him a fascist, and I'm pretty sure he might actually denounce the U.S. working with him. But let's see.
Yeah, since it wasn't just Pinochet, but like there were other examples during the Cold War where, I mean, even under Kirkpatrick Doctrine, right wing dictators tend to be pro Western and are more likely to reform compared to left wing dictators or pro Soviet dictators that usually tend to be hardliners about like global communism and expanding the influence of it.
Like the thing is, there's definitely the case that the German Empire could have easily have ended up with a Stresemann, and if that's the case, we obviously can't know what would have happened because this is alternate history. We only have speculation, but thing is, I would say it's more likely it would have been better than worse.
Yeah, and the other thing is, even due to Germany losing the war, that wasn't the war to end all wars, where that did give rise to Nazi Germany because Germany lost the war. Well, if there was a peace treaty and not the Treaty of Versailles, then there's an argument to make that it could have actually prevented the Nazis, or they would have just been considered fringe and extremist movement inside Germany.
Oh yeah, like the DNVP, the German National People's Party. I believe that's what it's. Yeah, the German National People's Party. I believe that's what its name was. They were essentially the right. They were a very right wing faction, but they were also a. But they were not Nazis. They were essentially monarchist and nationalist. So I feel like that would be the.
Anyways, I'll just for the audience say more then about that because in
Oh,
the case of
sorry. I was just saying that the DNVP were not Nazis and that most of the German right wing coalitions were never included the Nazi Party because no one wanted to work with them. And without without the Treaty of Versailles, there would be no need for to work with the Nazis because they would be irrelevant.
yeah, there wouldn't have been the appeal for them. And the other thing is, I mean, even with Pinochet in the 70s, I mean, that was what some call either borderline fascist or a fascist government, and it managed to reform. And even Pinochet was democratically elected out of office. So, in the case of Germany, I mean, even how the U.S. has been with certain policies 200 years ago compared to now, countries do reform where just because Germany at the time, even though people may not like the German Empire, there's definitely a case that it would have been more likely to reform compared to like Bolshevik Russia then.
Yeah, well, I suppose. I mean, did we cover everything in that debate, or do you want to go into like more detail?
Yeah, we can go in more detail where I've kind of given more of my thoughts. So, like, you can give more of your thoughts on whatever segment, then whether World War I, World War II, like divorce topic.
Well, I disagree a lot with this idea that people always question that. Well, this democracy. Would you rather have the 25,000 under democracy or the 70,000 under fascism? But I feel like there's one thing that should be added. Which regime are we talking about? Are we going to talk about 70,000 in Nazi Germany or 70,000 in somewhere like Franco, Spain? Are we talking 25,000 in somewhere like the United States? Or are we talking 25,000 in somewhere like 2006 Iraq, Bolivia, somewhere like that?
Yeah, since that is like a major factor with the like argument of more wealth in a country with less freedom, because like there was even one tweet that I sent out that like Kevin liked where I said if the average person had, if let's say, or just let's say a person had 5 kids to take care of, it can make the equivalent of 15,000 like in modern day value in Carter's America or Pinochet's Chile, or not, or 600,000 in Pinochet's Chile, 15,000 in America. They would probably choose the $600,000 salary.
Yeah, I mean, also, again, like people always seem to confuse Nazism with fascism. Fascism is a very negative ideology, but it is not the same level as Nazis. We've established that, like again,
Yes, since I mean with the ideologies, like neither of them are good, and that was what I was trying to say to Kevin is I don't approve of either of them. I don't think like both are good, but that is true that there is a clear distinction, and even when people like think of the death toll surrounding health, I mean, how many people were killed in Mussolini's Italy compared to Pol Pot's Cambodia, or how many people were killed in Franco's Spain compared to Mao Zedong's China? And there's all these comparisons to show that in some cases, like it is much less in terms of the death toll compared to communism, and that's usually because, at least in economic needs, is the system can, I mean, despite very little freedoms, it can more so meet people's demands compared to, I mean, communism, which seeks a lot more state control over the economy and oftentimes like really doesn't understand the need for prices for various goods, and that you can't just have the government control everything.
yeah. Also, people also seem to confuse authoritarian conservatism with fascism. Like there have been people I've called like Pinochet, Franco. You can make the case they're fascist, but then you also have to add like United Arab Emirates. Are they fascist? Is
No.
Singapore fascist? Because and that's the thing. Because but people will often conflate authoritarian conservatism with fascism as well. They go hand in hand more than authoritarian conservatism and Nazism, but they're also distinct.
Yeah, since that is true, because even for like Pinochet, I would say, I mean, some call him fascist, some don't. That's like up for people to decide. But I mean, in terms of authoritarian conservatism, is usually among fascists, they tend to like hate the democratic process, while authoritarian conservatism can coincide with the democratic process. I mean, and there's other things like one cracks down on opposition more, while one is willing to tolerate opposition. So there are a lot of meaningful differences, and it's easy for someone just to say like, oh well, two sides of the same coin.
Oh yeah, like I, you could make the case for Nazism and communism being the two sides, but fascism and communism are not the same side. They're just not.
Yeah, that's true. Since, I mean, economically, they're quite different because, I mean, even for instance, like in, let's say, the Soviet Union, while there were various reforms that did take place, like for, and de-Stalinization that occurred, is there was much more government control compared to countries such as, because even with free market reform, people usually think of Reagan or Thatcher, but there was Pinochet in the 70s, which did largely neoliberal reform in his country.
You know, actually, this is a little off topic, but it always seemed interesting. Like, I like the far right in most places are like very anti-neoliberal, but the far right in Latin America is extremely friendly towards neoliberalism.
Yeah, that's kind of weird then how it's like, and that kind of just shows that like there is dispute then is it's not unified, because even you said like when comparing fascism and communism versus Nazism and communism, those two comparisons are very different then.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not to say like any of the three ideologies are good, but there does need to be a bit more distinction with them. And because it seems with World War One, Kevin was, it conflated both the Russia, like when the Bolsheviks took power, and the German Empire is morally equal, because he saw one as proto-fascist, he saw the other is communist. Well, in the case of World War Two, he had the same two sides of the same coin line argument then, which seemed a bit puzzling because like World War One and World War Two are a bit different in the sense the German Empire was not as bad as Germany would be around 20 to 30 years later.
Man, because seems like there's always this thing that social liberals tend to make, that their idea was the one that managed to make Europe better. But I particularly don't believe that, because if you actually look at it, the economies of these countries went up before social liberalism happened. It's like in a lot of successful countries are still fairly conservative, like Japan, Singapore, United Arab Emirates. It's like in Italy, Italy's pretty conservative too.
Yeah, since as far as the economic argument, I mean, even America in the 50s, it used to be more conservative. And originally, Kevin was trying to say that liberalism economy great, but then I brought up median income relative to inflation and cost of various goods that people commonly purchase, which go up higher than inflation. And then Kevin, in his conclusion, said, well, it's still good in spite of the money, then, like showing that it's not necessarily as society becomes more liberal, it becomes more wealthy. And even if it does, it's usually in spite of the fact rather than because of the.
Yeah. Like again, another thing to say is that Europe is, I wouldn't say stagnant, but they have slower economic growth than what they have been having, especially during the Cold War era. Like, because especially in like the 50s and the 60s, Europe saw like a huge rise in GDP, and it's like social liberalism like especially in, like West Germany, things like gay marriage, actually homosexuality was still illegal in West Germany until 1968. So I don't really see that social liberalism is necessary to make a rich nation. It's just not.
Yeah, that's true. Since as far as like social liberalism or like tolerance of certain behavior, because even I was bringing up too, like Kevin about like people drinking and smoking, like I don't see how that becoming more acceptable or mainstream would make a society more wealthy. And even among wealth in the economy, it is something where it's not enough just to look at the GDP. It depends where the wealth is coming from, because if let's say that like the alcohol industry makes over $1 billion compared to, I don't know, let's say like a various textbook industry makes over $1 billion, even though in terms of economic value they could be the same, they do mean very different, like they do meet very different functions for society. Because I think with the argument of there's things beyond just material wealth, as it sides more in the other direction then. Because usually with social liberalism you do, and one reason why corporations usually push social liberalism or the country moving further to the left is simply because they can make a quick buck off of it then.
I believe that's the philosophy behind pink capitalism.
Yeah, since there's really like, I mean, no other reason. I mean, part of it is because some of the CEOs agree with it, but part of it is just that if you appeal to certain groups, then you just make more money off of it. Because, I mean, even with some companies that like try, like even for instance with the Georgia voting bill, where some companies were like boycotting Georgia over concerns over voting rights, it's not that they necessarily believe in voting rights, because they do business with communist China. It's more so just to virtue signal, like to various groups to get them to buy their product.
I'm just trying to wonder something about this specific thing, though. A little bit of pushback. How are they exactly, though, going to make money if they're pulling out of a state? That's all my question is.
Well, in terms of that, they move to another state because the All Star game goes from one place to another. But that is true that to some extent, like is given recent controversies, it could actually backfire for the companies where some of them could start to lose around a quarter of their buyers for the products, simply because it could become increasingly political, where whether or not you purchase Coca-Cola, then people can determine what political views are.
I mean, it definitely could always backfire on them, and then basically, I want to know if it does. Do the people do this backfires on? Do they end up starting to essentially grift to the conservative side?
Yeah, I don't know about that, because I mean, even one example is, let's take like two industries that sell chicken sandwiches, even Chick-fil-A versus Burger King. One has gotten a lot more controversy than the other, and one is more conservative. So I think a lot of it is with these companies, they see that liberal positions don't tend to be as controversial, while conservative positions do. So it's easier just to take the path of least resistance, and also the path appealing to certain people's pleasures and getting maximum profit.
Well, I I have run out of any ideas to talk about. Is there anything you want to talk about still?
because you were saying like with World War One is that the German Empire like wasn't really this great evil as well. That was worse than the Russians at the time. Like, what was your view like in the case of World War One, like the Germans and the Russians, and World War Two, the German and the Russians?
Well, World War One, the Germans were better than the Russians post 1917, and then in World War Two, I would actually argue they were roughly the same. I do think the Nazi Germany had the potential to be worse, though, but potentially,
Uh,
if they actually succeeded. Which
Guys,
that's a
I'll be
big.
right back.
What did you say, Dragon?
I'll be right back. Just give me a
Okay.
second. I gotta.
yeah, that's fine. And you
I
said
guess-
another. Oh, continue.
Dragon. Yeah, I was just gonna say that once you're done, maybe Dragon could give some of his opinions on this. But is there?
Yeah, and the
were
other-
you were saying something?
Oh, and the other point you said like the money argument is a good line then of it that the debt massively went up, which Kevin kind of seemed to support MMT at least in the case of the 1910s and the 1940s. Like even though he may have done streams about debt, at least in those two cases he does support it.
Yeah. Anyway, Dragon, do you have opinions on the debate?
Debate between what?
Oh, not the. Did you not see the debate between capitalist Neocon and Kevin Castley?
Not yet, but I came here. I will watch it afterwards, after the show, guys. So, when was this?
So this was like late June between myself and Kevin Castley, and it was about World War One, World War Two, and divorce.
What's up?
Hey,
Hey,
so
How are
I'm
y'all
guessing
neocons doing?
I'm doing all right.
Doing fine. So, Magarano, did you happen to see that debate by chance? Because that's just wondering, like,
I saw
If
that
you have any-
debate. I thought it was one of the gayest debates of all time.
Yes, I am.
Oh.
Yes, I am.
It was one of the gayest debates ever.
Yeah.
yeah. So, are you want to elaborate more on that? Or
Well, I think the U.S. should not have gotten involved anywhere because America should not be involved anywhere.
so in
And
other
that was our greatest mistake.
words, Trump's foreign policy of try to get out of Africa, get out of Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and really just any point in the world.
Yeah, everywhere. Like, you know, do you not see the hat?
Huh? Would America be great if it were just for 4 more years?
Yeah, make it great for 4 more years.
Huh?
All right. Can I say something now?
Yeah, you
Sorry.
can.
yeah, I just
I
muted
would-
you because I heard background noise.
All right. What I would do in Afghanistan right now is do another surge.
Another surge? Why?
What?
Because
Dragon.
the Taliban are taking
Yeah.
more. It's
Sorry.
Afghanistan's gotten more violent.
It's gotten more
So it would
violent.
be better to. It's gotten. I mean, I would not necessarily, but
You
like
can
make the situation better.
you can blame people like Hillary Clinton for that.
Okay,
And Obama.
this stream isn't about Afghanistan. I should probably.
All right.
I'm putting my.
All right,
So
if
this
we're
is
not talking
more
about that, that's okay. World War
This is
One.
more about the Castley capitalist neocon.
Yeah, okay, but he just mentioned it. Okay, I just wanted to mention. He just mentioned. Let's stick to the topic.
Yeah. So see, this is going to be a little.
I believe World War One was justified because, like, Germany declared war on the United States, and they were going to use Mexico to attack us.
Well, wasn't
They
that
shut
like
down our men.
well, wasn't that World War II where Germany declared on the U.S.?
No, this was also back in World War One. They also attacked, medical ships.
Yeah, I mean there was Lusitania at the time.
Yeah. So you debated on. Did you agree with? Kevin says it was justified, right? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
he did.
because for the debates and our various stances, my stance for both World War One and World War II is only in the case the Germans are going to fight the Russians. In no other case, like, do you give military aid and do send some troops over there, although you don't spend as much just because both wars were very costly. And Kevin said fighting the Germans was justified in both cases, and we should have allied with the Russians to fight the Germans. While for divorce, I was saying that there should be some fine imposed on people who get a divorce where they have to pay some fee to the government to incentivize people not to get divorced. Well, Kevin didn't even say whether divorce was a bad thing. He was just saying like, oh yeah, it's perfectly fine. People should be able to do it, and compared it to job turnout.
Mind if I push back a little on that divorce thing, because like this is more of a hypothetical situation. But what if, say, this is an abusive relationship? Can a divorce happen without the use of a fine if there's a legitimate cause like abuse?
Yeah, because if Kevin did ask about like specific cases, like in the case of every law, there's always few exceptions because I mean even in the case of abortion, nobody's calling for a total ban on abortion. They can recognize when a woman's life is threatened. So I would say that there can definitely be few cases of domestic violence where people can be given a free pass without a fine.
Yeah. So Capital is Neocon, right? You're. Is that? I figure you and Kevin would agree with each other because you guys are like a Neocon.
Yeah, that's right. Capitalist neocon then. And I call myself neocon like just because in the modern day I do support intervention where I think the
Are you
US
really a Neocon?
yeah, I think the US like should declare war on Iran, and I think the US should like topple Assad with regime change followed in building, and it should intervene in some socialist countries such as Venezuela and Cuba.
I agree. I do agree with that too.
Though I'm not a non-interventionist or an isolationist.
Yeah.
I gotta
There's
say,
issues with Kevin you disagree with.
I gotta say, I don't agree with you on the whole law thing. Just because, like just because there are laws saying, oh, there are exceptions, doesn't mean doesn't mean it's always gonna like fucking work.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's true with every law that it doesn't work 100% of the time, but the question is whether having the law is overall better than not having the law. And
Is that law going to be effective though? I mean, like, domestic abuse is already like a very widespread problem, so I cannot imagine how this law would be effective unless you have some very sophisticated support network, which I don't know. Do you actually have any, like, would you support such a thing? Do you have any good proposals for such a plan policy?
like as far as support networks, then to like have a carrot and stick approach where just have punishments, you also have rewards on the other side.
Rewards for what?
Like, because I mean, in terms of punishment, it's defined, but I could also see like having rewards in addition where the rewards can be funded through the fines that are imposed.
Rewards for what though? What are you talking about?
Like rewards in the sense, like even you were like talking a bit about, like instead of punishing people for getting divorced, you can have various resources such as counseling for people struggling with marriage to make sure that they don't get divorced.
So you want to have socialized marriage counseling?
I mean, or it can go to other purposes. Like, I mean, even it can go towards like the education system, which can like teach people early on about like what is a healthy marriage in the long run. Like, it can go towards all types of purposes, whatever a person wants, as far as what they think will benefit society.
Good night.
Yes,
Good
Draken.
night.
You brought toilet paper?
Yes, I did.
Thank you.
Just ignore that for now. I muted the wrong person. Anyway, you were saying. Oh, who was saying something?
Yeah, Dragon was saying something.
Yeah.
Dragon.
So I don't really think you have much of a disagreement with Kevin on foreign policy, but maybe.
I mean, well, as far as pre-World War II, there's quite a bit of disagreement. And I didn't watch his whole post show, but he even said on one part he felt like he had more in common than Antifa than when debating me.
Yeah, he did
That's
say.
a bit.
Yeah.
That's a bit weird that he would say that.
You have more in common with Antifa than you?
Yeah, he said, like, in the post show, I didn't watch the whole thing, but he said, like, and this is a quote from him, like, not word for word, but he said that he felt like he had more in common with Antifa than when he was debating me.
That's weird, and you're a
So
neocon.
he is so he's grifting so hard that he's like grifted outside of the Overton window to like radical like fucking communists that fucking like engage in political violence.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is that normally, like, if I just had the views that I have, but I was isolationist or the America First crowd, he probably would just say, like, oh, I'm going to dunk on this isolationist. But, like, because I support war with Iran, and even The Hill, it did a poll where only 5% of Americans actually support a war with Iran. So he knows it's not a common position, meaning that he to work to some
Doesn't he
extent
agree with you?
people. But because of that, like that I would agree with him on war in Iran, like he's kind of in a way more disappointed that among people that agree with him on foreign policy, they have very different views socially or history wise than he does.
Well,
Well,
I
who
know
fucking-
socially it's because
Who the fuck cares about history views? It's a bunch of coulda, woulda, shoulda. Like, it doesn't fucking matter. You can say, oh, I would have nuked the Soviet Union, I would have nuked China, just like, well, you fucking can't, so, like, nobody fucking cares.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And the other thing is kind of like more the divide that's been going on. And people can say, like, as far as who started it, but like Kevin increasingly trying to appeal to the more liberal hawks, in which, I
There's
mean,
like
liberal
four
hawks
people,
are minority among a
four
minority. I mean,
people in his community. There's
because
four.
among
Yeah,
hawks, like,
anti-theist.
because even among hawks, like when looking at polls among those that voted for Bush and McCain,
Good night.
they tend to be more conservative among people who support intervention. Usually, liberals don't tend to support intervention on average. So it's a minority among a minority. In the sense, 5% of people want to declare war on Iran, But yet among those 5%, probably less than half of them are liberal.
Yeah, but these aren't just a minority among a minority. These guys are like liberal unilateralists.
Which is not even a thing.
No,
They're
Yeah,
trying to make it a thing.
let's consider how small this group is. Bill Hawks, that's a pretty small group right there. They're liberal Hawks, that's a minority of a minority. They're anti-theist liberal Hawks, that's a minority in a minority in a minority. They're liberal Hawks, anti-theist liberal Hawks. Anti-theist Unitarian liberal Hawks. That's a minority in a minority in a minority in a minority.
We can't stop talking about minorities.
Yeah, so I think
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I think in that part, like Kevin, like he almost was surprised, and I think like deep down, like he wanted me to agree with him more, just because like he knows that there's not that many people that are Hawks, so it's like okay, you can bring your audience size down from or your group size down from 5 people to 3 people, and then you can have further litmus test and get it down to 2 people. Then, because at least for me with Hawks is. I mean, again, people can say as far as who started it, but like it's not good just to cut off what already is a minority movement. It's cool too. Like, I mean, even though I don't agree with Malcolm X, it's like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, like in group fighting. It really doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, it really wouldn't make much sense for them to like do infighting, especially during that time. And it doesn't make sense for Hawks to do infighting. But, you know, shit happens.
Yeah.
People drag it on. I'm trying to move on.
Kevin loves drama.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, in terms of Hawks, they do tend to be conservative on average, then.
Like 99% of them are conservative.
Yeah, because I mean, even in terms of office, like how many like neoconservatives compared to liberal Hawks can people name? Even called liberal Hawks, like I mean, Hillary Clinton compared to George W. Bush. George W. Bush wanted to keep the search going, while Hillary Clinton, when she ran in 2008, she wanted to get the troops home. She wasn't focused on winning the war. So, I mean, even when people say, "Oh, well, that's a liberal hawk," they're usually not as hawkish as some politicians are.
Christopher Hitchens, for example.
Yeah, but how many people really know who Christopher Hitchens even is?
Also, the notable liberal Hawks, or Democrats, I guess, throughout history, like Irving Kristol, became conservatives. And Gene Kirkpatrick became a Republican. They like when they become Hawks, they often end up becoming conservative.
Yeah,
like they don't.
Gene Kirkpatrick was liberal, but in domestically, but like
she was a Democrat and she became a Republican.
I don't know, but she was liberal on economic issues, but deeply like realistic in foreign policy.
What do you mean liberal on economic issues?
Like she was a Democrat.
No, she was a Democrat. She became a Republican.
Well, she became a Republican foreign policy.
Before she became a Republican, she was like liberal and
she was a Democrat, but she became a Republican because she realized, wow, this party's a fucking dumpster fire. And
that's true. Yeah. But I mean, regardless, the point is that if people want to say like neoconservatives are like liberals who became conservative, there is some truth to it.
But they're not leftists at that point.
Well, they are opposed to the far left among their party, because that's why they switched over to the Republican Party, is they didn't like the increasingly isolationist like attitudes, and I mean also like other far left elements of their party.
like there's a lot of neocons that were leftists, but they switched over.
Yeah. Yeah, and among like neocon, I mean, you don't really see a neocon to liberal hawk pipeline, or let's just say a conservative to liberal hawk pipeline. You don't really see as people become more hawkish, they become more liberal.
That's because Kevin was never a neocon.
He called himself the liberal neocon.
Yeah, I would just say liberal hawk since it's much easier than like
That's what he calls himself.
That's the
Conservative.
label. Yeah, but he called himself back then like liberal neocon.
Yeah, because for me, I just view it as like liberal hawk and neocon then.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, and even among like the liberal elements, the anti-theism views like kind of don't make sense because I mean this idea there like people even if they don't completely agree with the religion, they can at least learn from the religion and just saying like no, that's arbitrary. However, like if you get your morals from Netflix or Star Trek, then that's perfectly fine. Just don't get it from religious books.
Yeah.
yeah. So what do you think? What does anybody think about Christopher Hitchens?
Well, I think for him, he was good on foreign policy, but like in other positions.
For me, he was good on Iraq, but not. He wasn't good on everything. But
You can't even always have good foreign policy positions, though. Like,
I do
If you
agree
wanna-
with him on Rwanda.
no, you
Yeah,
can look
since-
up like some of Hitchens' defense of like the Viet Cong, for instance. It's like,
God, cringe.
Yeah, since in terms of the Rwandan genocide, that definitely was something where the U.S. should have intervened at the time. Yeah, and as far as Hitchens with the Viet Cong, I haven't heard of all of Hitchens' work, but I just know that among some interventions, like such as the Iraq War, he was a strong supporter of it.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I think interventions like Libya and Syria were half measures.
Yeah, since that too, since like Libya and Syria weren't really taken as seriously by the government then, because of the case of Libya. I mean, even though taking out Gaddafi was better than the region is still currently in a civil war, and in the case of Syria, it would have been much easier to take out Assad early on than to get to a point now where he's on the winning side of the civil war.
Yeah. So, what's your view on Afghanistan?
Now, my view on Afghanistan is that getting out is a mistake just because the and will likely, even if they don't get to the capital, they are going to take over more territory. And considering all the progress that the U.S. has made, like for instance, even 3 million Afghan women who go to school, they're not going to be able to go to school anymore when the Taliban take control. Is it definitely something where the U.S. should keep up the involvement until the Afghan government is able to defend itself, in which case the U.S. can start to leave and support a form of foreign aid.
I know, but what I'm saying is that with Biden, I think it's weird. Like we're gonna get out like September 11th.
Yeah, I mean, optics-wise, I mean, you're basically saying after 20 years, America will surrender to any conflict if it's just been long enough.
Yeah, but don't tell them if you're gonna leave. Don't tell them that you're gonna leave on September 11th and then embolden them on your way out.
Yeah, because it's just a huge PR victory for the Taliban where they can say, like, look at us, we were able to get the world's largest army to get out after 20 years. All we just have to do is not even win the war, just prolong it and the West will leave.
Just wait.
Yeah, just drag out the conflict as long as possible.
Yeah.
So in the case of Afghanistan, as far as what the government could do now, I would say that like a surge is needed and cracking down on extremism there, like in order to root out the Taliban from any kind of power.
Or just tone down the violence. I mean,
The Taliban will never be removed.
But the U.S. like had good policy where it could track fairly accurately, especially like in the modern day where there's more technology. It's easier to track extremism than it would have been 100 years ago.
Like, what kind of technology?
I mean, well, nowadays, I mean, more people they have like smartphones or use some type of technology at work where if you wanted to keep track of a certain group, even just 100 years ago, it's easier today. And people can say, oh, well, the Taliban don't use technology. But in that case, among members of society that don't use technology, it's easier to keep a track on them compared to if society as a whole just doesn't use any that much technology.
they
Well,
use
well,
limited technology like radios.
the Taliban literally doesn't use like modern technology.
Yeah, in which case it's easier to like isolate groups which don't use that much technology.
They're already isolated. They self-isolate.
Yeah, but among
They're
like
not. They're not a global caliphate.
yeah, but among like citizens in the regions, it in that case it's easier with a fair amount of confidence to track Taliban members.
You know what
I
do
mean,
you use spying? Like they
with less
they
attack
use radios.
with less attack vectors to use to spy on them, how is it easier to track them?
I mean, well, let's say you have a society where I don't know, 90% of people use the radio, 10% don't. Is it easier to keep track of the 10% of people who don't use the radio than it is if you live in a society where the radio just doesn't exist?
Well, I don't think it really makes much of a difference considering they have a pretty easy time determining who is operating the radio.
But the point is that you can tell if someone owns a radio or they own a TV that they're not a part of the Taliban. So thus you narrow the list among people who are not a part of it. You can get easier at the people who are a part of it.
Yeah, but sometimes they can. You don't know who is a member or not.
Well, they probably wouldn't be owning a TV and radio.
No, this kind of
Unless they-
scenario where you have to distinguish between the average civilian and like a terrorist is like only a serious situation in Gaza where Hamas hides among civilians. This is not like a serious scenario in like any other situation in the world.
Yeah.
Like, it literally does not make any difference. If anything, the lack of technology just makes them harder to track.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I mean, I don't think we should be fighting the same conflict for 84 years. I mean, at one point, you gotta do.
Yeah,
At
because
one point,
there's
at one point, you have to end it as fast as possible.
yeah, that is true that with resources there's a finite amount of resources for intervention, so you're getting the most bang for your buck or trying to help the most people out.
Yeah.
But what about I think it's Kanzuk, did you see the debate that occurred?
I watched part of it.
But what did you think of it?
You said you wanted to side with the Nazis instead of the Soviets.
Well, for that, I can clarify where I said insofar as they are to counter the Soviets. If they're not going to counter the Soviets, then there's no point in siding with them.
Yeah, but they attacked Russia.
So I said insofar as that context, if they're going to, among military provided, if they will use it against Russia, then it's worthwhile. But if they're going to use it for other purposes, then the aid should be cut off or not given.
But why would you want to cut off Russia?
Thanks.
Or why would you want to attack Russia when they're the weaker power? Is the question.
I mean, well, in the case of Russia, I was saying in the debate how I thought the threat of communism was greater, where it causes more damage than that. If there is to be a Cold War with the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, I think it's better to have a Cold War with Nazi Germany, just because worst case scenario, if something goes wrong, like either way, the world's going to be a worse place, but it won't be as bad compared to if the Soviet Union wins in the end.
Yeah, but against the Soviet Union, America has a fighting chance. That's the difference.
I mean, well, I think both America would have a pretty good chance.
No, they really wouldn't.
Like, just because even America's economy was much greater than Germany's was at the time, and America, it has some of the best public universities, and even with a lot of Jews that migrated out of Germany, so some of them worked for the U.S. government and went on to become great scientists.
Nazis also had great scientists. They had the first like ICBMs. They were making those V2 rockets. They had Project America. It was literally like the code name of their fucking project. They wanted to destroy America with their fucking rockets because they had no way to project power across the fucking ocean.
Well, in the case of Germany at the time, it was fighting both the West and the East, and there could have definitely been a peace deal where Germany, at least in the short run, it would not attack the West if it was given the green light to attack the East.
Yeah, but wasn't Germany? Didn't Hitler have to go because of he was attacking Europe, trying to dominate Europe, committing a genocide?
Didn't he
I mean,
want to
well,
attack the East anyway?
Yeah, well, in the case of Stalin, is he also like killed at least 20 million people? So, like, and there was the Holodomor there, which occurred.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole
Wasn't-
more
do you think-
occurred.
Yeah, but do you guys think that was worse than the Holocaust?
I mean, well, in terms of deaths in total, the Holocaust was worse because it did kill more people than the Holodomor. But overall, like, Stalin did kill more people than Hitler did when he took power. And even among like communism as a whole, like even in China, Mao Zedong killed far more people than Stalin and Hitler did.
Yeah. I would say the Holocaust killed more than 6 million.
Yeah, I killed around 10 to 12 because the 6 million statistic
Gypsies.
includes only like Jews. There were other groups that were killed also.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, the thing is, you gotta back the losing side.
Yeah, because Kevin was saying that during the debate where he viewed them as two sides of the same coin, and you back the weaker side to take out the stronger side, or like use dual containment. But I was saying that, like in the case of dual containment, you don't always get the opportunity to contain both. And I was saying that despite them both being bad, there is a moral difference between the two.
There is a moral difference. You gotta think geostrategically.
Uh-huh.
Russia was weaker.
Yeah, and the other thing is with the U.S. and like the Jewish population here, it would definitely have that as an edge because like Jewish citizens do tend to have the highest IQ compared to most groups out there. So I think there could have definitely been a chance, like if there, because there probably would be a Cold War after with the U.S. and Germany, a chance that the U.S. would win.
I mean, sure, the Manhattan Project probably could have been successful, like regardless, but
It already worked in
Ge-
Japan.
Germany still would have made those rockets, and they probably eventually could have made their own nuclear program.
Hey, does anybody think the nuke on Japan was necessary back then?
Yes.
Yeah, in the case of that, I actually would say if the U.S. was going to fight World War II and side with the Soviets, I mean, definitely nuking Japan was justified just because it ended the conflict quicker and less people died overall because Japan was not going to surrender.
But the Soviets weren't even at Japan, outmoved Japan in 1945.
Yeah.
Then, so, I mean, in that case, then like because of, I mean, again with nuking Japan, if the U.S. was going to intervene, like on behalf of the Soviets, it should have done so when Hitler invaded Poland. It shouldn't have waited until Pearl Harbor in order to intervene, just because it would have cost less and been easier to contain the problem.
You know, people like to say, oh, Japan was ready to surrender, nothing should have happened. Just like, why didn't it
Harry
surrender
Truman
after
made that offer, tried to get them to surrender.
Yeah, there was the
And he said
Potsdam,
no.
there was the Potsdam Declaration where they said surrender or we're going to fuck you up beyond belief. They didn't surrender. There was the first bombing. They didn't surrender. Like, a lot of people don't know this. Like, the bombings happened within 3 days of each other. They weren't like consecutive. They didn't happen like at the same time. So
Yeah.
no, they were not going to surrender.
Yeah, that's true that they weren't planning on surrendering, and it did take the two nuclear weapons to get them to surrender. So I do think the nuking of Japan was justified, and the main criticism is that is in the case of Korea with the Korean War, definitely the use of nuclear weapons could have been considered there.
Yeah, MacArthur wanted to like nuke China.
Well, he wanted to nuke the Yalu River, which is the border.
Yeah. Does any of you think he was right, that MacArthur was right, or not really?
In the case of nuclear weapons, I wouldn't say 100% use them, but there definitely is an argument to be made, and I think it should have been seriously considered rather than MacArthur getting fired.
Well, he didn't get fired. He got fired for insubordinance. He didn't get fired just because he said, "Oh, let's do the nukes."
I mean, well, obviously it was a variety of reasons, but that probably was one reason that Truman didn't like.
I mean, it could have been no. He got fired for insubordinance. It was not
Insubordination.
just
Just because of the nukes. It was mainly.
I mean, yeah, I'm pretty sure for being insubordinate, like, kind of had something to do with it, but like, it wasn't just wanting to nuke them in of itself.
Yeah.
And it's important to note, like, MacArthur didn't want to like nuke Beijing or whatever. He wanted to nuke the Yalu River.
Yeah,
So
it's
Chinese troops,
military bases.
I don't think they had, as far as I know, they didn't have bases on the river, but they had bases like nearby, so so they couldn't cross it because like there were so many fucking Chinese troops, and that would have probably had a serious impact on the war.
Yeah, but I was wondering with the, like, you could say hashtag nuke pilled argument, what do people think of Kevin's position on North Korea?
It's a terrible one.
It's kind of stupid. It's dumb.
It only makes sense if you think back, if in the context of MacArthur nuking the Yellow River.
Yeah.
But even then,
Not now.
It's kind of iffy, even.
Since that was another area where, like, I actually agreed with Kevin quite a bit then, where I think I wouldn't say 100% like it should be done, but at least to me, it makes sense that it's considered with North Korea building up their nuclear arsenal on defensive purposes. And when they get enough nukes, they do seek to reunify the South and revenge upon Japan. And it's much easier to stop them now than to stop them when they have 1,000 nukes.
Hey, your name is Capitil. It's Neocon. Do you believe in the Gene Kirkpatrick doctrine?
Like, in terms of lesser of two evils, that you support a side that's not good, but it's better than the other side. I mean, I don't call it Kirkpatrick doctrine. I do have the lesser of two evil mentality, both when it comes to voting for a politician and when it comes to supporting various sides in the world.
I don't think that's what that means.
No, I mean, you could explain what it means, since I do support lesser of two ism in the world, if
Evils, but
you could call it
do you
that.
agree with her philosophy?
I mean, in terms of the context, where if you support right-wing dictators, they tend to be pro-Western and reform more compared to left-wing dictators, which tend to be more pro-Soviet, I would say yes.
A pro-American dictator is better than a hostile democracy.
Yeah, I would actually say that then.
I would say it would have been better if we had like Haftar in Libya instead of a democracy, because you have the Muslim Brotherhood
Yeah,
around.
because for me, that's one disagreement with a lot of neocons is I don't think democracy should be the goal in a region. Maybe it could be the goal long term, but immediately when you take over a region, I mean, the citizens are fairly radicalized and usually anti-American. So you can't really have.
I mean, Jane
true
Kirkpatrick was a
democracy.
neocon, but she was more realistic about that.
Yeah, because you can't realistically have a democracy if you take over a place and say, okay, now vote. Wow, like such a surprise that the anti-American party
That's what
won.
happened in Libya. Like the second Gaddafi was gone,
That's what
voting
happened
time.
in Iraq.
I
But
think there should
Iraq
be
was
like
even transitional period.
yeah, because I do think like in like a dictatorship that's pro America rather than a democracy that's anti-America, it's better to have the pro-American option. And I mean, there can be long-term transitions towards democracy, but at least in the short run, it's better to secure alliances regardless of the system of government.
Yeah.
I hate to do this, but I'm gonna have to end the stream right about now because I have a trip soon. So
Yeah, that's
you guys
fine.
have Discord?
So I guess we can give like closing thoughts then, like each person, I don't
Yeah.
know, 30 seconds or so or a minute.
how about this? If anyone wants to make a closing remarks, you have a minute.
All right. It's good. It was a good stream. Capitalist Neocon, you followed me? I added you to the group chat? Nope.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. It was good meeting you.
Yeah, same also, Dragon. And yeah, if anyone hasn't watched the debate, like it's definitely something.
I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, it's definitely something to check out and be excited about.
So when was it? What date was this?
It was like the end of June. I think it was like June 29th or 30th then. And and definitely parts of it were funny because there was like at the beginning of my World War II introduction, Kevin was saying like, "Oh, I'm cringing at your opinion," which I just thought to be funny then that he was like overreacting to it. And then definitely in the post show, he did have a bit of a meltdown.
He had a meltdown.
He doesn't really like you.
Yeah, he had a meltdown, and someone like apparently from what I heard, he also what it sounded like he was doxing someone in it too.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
he had a
yeah.
meltdown with someone who literally supported war with Iran that has the same position as he does. And he said, I mean, I didn't watch the whole thing, but he said one part that he felt like he had more in common with Antifa than me.
That's ridiculous, and you're a neocon.
Yeah, I'm gonna end the broadcast now unless anyone has any other statements.
I'm good.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Just thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next one.